Hi, my name is Justin, aka Ghost Reader, and today I am going to do my wrap up for May. So I've read a lot of books in May. I got to finish some books that were left over from the month of April. So I had a really good reading month and some very interesting reads. So here we go. The first book that I'm going to talk about is Late in the Empire of Men by Christopher Kempf. And this was a really interesting book of poetry. It actually won the Four-Way Books Levy's Prize in Poetry, and it was the title that really caught my attention and got me to pick it up. And so basically, he talks basically about growing up in America, which he likens to an empire, and he alludes also to the empires of like Troy and Rome in this book. So throughout the book, throughout the poetry, he weaves in references to the ancient past. So Virgil, what happened at Troy, the town of Heir is mentioned. So he knows his history. It was also interesting looking at his life, because he's basically kind of in a way talking about his life as he's growing up and how it's changing. And he talks about basically playing Call of Duty and not really realizing that on the other side of the world that people really were in those situations, living in an age where you have predictive text and how that can be a harrowing experience. And so I really like this book. It covers a lot of topics, talking about like things like playing Oregon Trail and the juxtaposition between him being on the computer and playing it and feeling like a man accomplishing everything, but along the way, like his whole wagon train dies, but he himself isn't really experiencing that himself. He's been playing it through a video game. So in a way, like I felt that some of what he's talking about was kind of like in this age today, we kind of have separated ourselves from the reality of some of the bad stuff that's happened in history and in the world. Playing Call of Duty, but across the world, someone is actually living that out, playing the Oregon Trail, but not really realizing that people actually had to go through that. And then he also talks about becoming an adult, coming through high school, and coming to his own sexual awareness and things like that. So it was a really interesting read. I glad I picked it up, and I think if he writes another book of poetry, I'll definitely give that a read as well. So my next book of poetry is The Wasteland and Other Poems by T.S. Eliot. And me and this book basically fought the whole time I've read it. So in this Barnes & Noble's Classic Edition, they have The Wasteland, this poem, The Wasteland, and there's also Proof Rock and Other Observations, and then Poems 1920. So I just didn't really get the point of Wasteland, of what he was trying to say with actually a lot of his poems. I just didn't really get the point of it. And that's not saying that T.S. Eliot is a bad writer. It's just that I, for some reason, just wasn't really getting it. I actually enjoyed Pure Rock and Other Observations, which was written in 1917, a lot better than Wasteland, which was, I think, written in 1922. So I'm actually going to read this again, so I'm not going to put a judgment on whether this is a good or bad. A lot of people liked it on Goodreads. It has really good ratings. So I'm not going to say whether or not I personally like this just yet, because I'm going to reread it again. I'm going to take my time, because of course I was kind of trying to really get it finished in time for the end of May. So I'm going to take my time with it and see if my opinion changes. One thing I didn't necessarily like about this particular edition was that some of the poems are in French, completely in French. In order to read them, I need to go back to the original. I had to go to the back of the book in order to read it in English. That was a bit much. And also, there are a lot of references in his poems that I didn't get until I had to basically go back to the endnotes to kind of pick that up. So I had to constantly flipping back and forth between the endnotes to kind of pick out the references to kind of see what he was saying. So that kind of took away from the reading experience overall. So I'm going to read them again, take my time, read them again, see if my opinion changes with this particular book. So my favorite poetry of the month was the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. So the Canterbury Tales um, was my favorite because the stories in this, and this was considered poetry, um, the way it was originally written. And let me just say that the tales in this are really good. They range from being really serious tales to being really humorous tales. Each one is entertaining, and they were all great. I enjoyed reading the Canterbury Tales, and I did not necessarily think that I would. Actually, I put it off for a month because I thought that one, it was a really like thick book, but actually this particular edition from Bantam, on one side is the old English, like the old Middle English version, and then on the other side is the modern English version. So I actually read basically half the number of pages that are actually in this book. The good thing I liked about this book is that in the beginning of each tale, there's a short introduction to let you know what's going to happen in the tale and what was Geoffrey Chaucer's inspiration. So that was really interesting and great to have. So you're quite knowledgeable about what you're going into before you read it. So the tales in this book were great. The Knight's Tale was really classical and quite serious about like love and about heartache. And then you have like the Merchant and Reeve's Tale, which are just hilarious, really funny and scandalous. And then the Wife of Bath, who she's had like I think like five husbands, and she herself gives a very interesting story about marriage and what women want. And so that was really good. All the tales are really good, and they're all very unique. So one isn't like the other, which is really good. So if you haven't read the Canterbury Tales, I highly suggest that if have been thinking about it, that you do. My graphic novel / comic book trade paperback read of the month was Thanos. This is volume 2, the God Quarry of Thanos' current comic run with Marvel. I read this just before I went to go see Avengers, which was a good movie, and well, actually an amazing movie. And basically, in this volume, and just to summarize the previous volume, Thanos has basically come back and he's taken back his throne. However, Thanos is dying from mysterious illness and he doesn't know why. The personification of death has meanwhile teamed up with his son to basically take him down. So, in volume 1 he does, but he doesn't kill Thanos. Instead, he lets him basically die on his own. And what he wants him to do is basically die alone and broken. So this begins with Thanos basically alone on the planet he used to rule, broken, and basically a team of people who are actually trying to kill him in the first volume basically come and say, your son is going crazy because his son has the Phoenix Force in him, which is this very powerful being in the Marvel Universe. And basically they're trying to help, they decide they're going to help Thanos to beat his son. So this is really good. I've actually enjoyed Jeff Lemire's writing in this series. Jeff Lemire is one of my favorite writers. So unfortunately he ended with this particular volume, so I won't be continuing the next just because I don't really have the money to buy as many graphic novels as I want to. But this was quite well done. And basically seeing Thanos really vulnerable and exposed and how he is once he realizes that, and then see him make the choice of whether or not and how he wants to give back his power was really good. So if you like Thanos and you may be interested in reading more about him, you can pick up his current run. They volume 1 and volume 2 are out, and volume 3 should be out soon if you want to read more Marvel. Next book I want to talk about took me 2 months to get through, but was a good read, and my book got wet unfortunately, so it was all messed up. But Anthony Trollope's Can You Forgive Her was a great read. I read this as part of Steve Donahue's read-along. Reread this book, and it was great. Actually, I don't read a lot of Victorian novels, but Anthony Trollope is a great writer, and I'll definitely be reading more of him in the future. So basically, this story is about Alice Vavasseur, who basically is a woman. She's engaged to one man, but she decides not to marry him and decides to get engaged to another guy who isn't really the best choice. And basically the story explores whether or not you can forgive her for having made that choice. And the great thing about this book is not only is the main plot great, but all the subplots in it are good as well. And I actually will be making a separate video talking about this book. But this book was really great. And if you like Victorian literature and you're looking for someone to read that you haven't read before, and you haven't read Trollope, I suggest you pick up Can You Forgive Her by Anthony Trollope. The next book I'm going to talk about took me 4 months to read, and that is The Fortunes of Africa, a 5,000 year history of wealth, greed, and endeavor by Martin Meredith. I also will be making a separate video for this book, but this was a very eye-opening and informational book. It's a very good read if you want to learn more about like a survey view of Africa, because it follows the history of Africa from like the pyramids all the way to modern times, and it basically talks about it talks a lot about not just the history there, like political history, but also like the economic history before the colonial powers came into Africa. So before the Portuguese came and began trading with the Africans, but also like the trade that was going on within Africa itself, and then the interactions they had with the outside world before the Europeans began to come in droves and began the slave trade. And then it also talks a lot about basically there's a really good overview of the history of Africa, and really well done, because for a history that's really diverse, because there are 50 some odd countries, there are over 50 countries in the continent of Africa itself. So there's a lot of information to kind of condense into one book, and I feel like he did a really good job at this. So like I said, I'm going to put up a video talking about this, talking about this book in detail. So keep a lookout for that. And last but not least, I did a buddy read with Jenna at Bibliofilth. So if you haven't heard of Jenna, go ahead and check her out. She talks a lot about comics, and her recent wrap-up in the month of May for what she read in May was quite great, because she does it tipsy. So if you want to get a good laugh, but also get some good comic recommendations, and she also reads some really good books as well, go check out her channel. I'll put that down in the description box below. So we buddy read Star Wars Heir of the Empire by Timothy Zahn. So this book is no longer considered part of the canon. Basically, when Disney came in with all the new stuff, they decided to make all the previous stuff, made at least a lot of it, majority of it, no longer part of the official Star Wars canon, so it now has the label Legends. This is a classic of that era when a lot of the stuff was canon, and basically in this book, Luke Skywalker is coming to his own as a Jedi. The New Republic has basically, they're winning the war against the Empire. The Empire looks like it's on its last legs, but this guy, the blue guy, Admiral Thrawn, is basically he's like a genius, and now he plans on bringing the Empire back. And so he has his plans, and he actually recruits a dark Jedi to help him achieve his goals. And that dark Jedi wants Luke and also his sister Leia, who is now pregnant with twins. So this was a really good read. I enjoyed it. I felt that the main villain, Thrawn, was a bit Sherlock Holmesy, whereas he was like really good at deducing things, like to the point where it kind of wasn't realistic, but he wasn't the perfect villain, which was great, meaning that not everything he did like worked according to plan. So that was good. So I really like this one. There's actually this is part of a trilogy, so I will be reading that trilogy as well. I plan to finish reading the trilogy and possibly buddy read that along with Jenna as well. So that's it for me for the month of May. Sorry if the video's a bit dark. I'm a slave to natural light, and the sun's behind the clouds. But if you liked this video, please hit the like button. If you read any of these books, please comment down in the comment section below what you thought about them. Especially Wasteland, if you read Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. What did you guys read last month in May, and what did you think about your reads? If you want to see more videos from me, please subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter at GhostReads28, and you can also follow me on Goodreads. The information for that is down in the description box. So guys, as always, keep reading.